When you're ready, Liz.
Oh, we're going to go straight into the script when I have to, remember my name and things, right? The bit that I'm always
Yeah,
scared.
I know.
Right.
It's hard, but we can do it. I believe in you.
I believe in... Okay, all right. Let's do it. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Flux.
I'm Ben McKenzie.
Welcome to Prat Chat, the monthly Terry Pratchett Book Club podcast.
Each month, we discuss one of Terry Pratchett's books with a special guest.
This month, we're not doing that.
No, this month we're recording live for the Australian Discworld Convention's online event, Nullus Anxietas, The Lost Con. We can't hear you applauding, but we assume you are.
I assume there's copious applause, so you know. So we're taking the opportunity to look back and discuss Men at Arms, a book that is gone but not forgotten.
And this is a book we discussed way back in our very first episode with special guest Cal Wilson, who is not here today. But hello to all of the online convention attendees watching live right now. Hooray!
Thank you for joining us. It is quite a trip not being able to hear if people are laughing or responses, but I just, I guess we should be used to that.
In that way, it's very much like recording a regular episode, isn't it?
Or just having a normal conversation where you make a joke and no one laughs and then you leave.
And yes. a bit sad about it. Yes, I know the feeling. Yes. Well, that's all right. But we thought for the... someone in the chat saying they're surprised we can't hear them laughing from where they are. But look, we thought for this episode, we're only doing a very short one today by the standards of our usual ridiculously long podcast episodes. So we thought we'd go back and take the opportunity to discuss an old book. And what better to suit the theme of the City of 1000 Surprises than the Watch book, which really immerses the reader in that city, Ankh-Morpork, and really gets into the meat of the Watch series and introduces us to so many characters, or really puts meat on the bones. The meeting, yes, of so many characters other than Men at Arms, which, this was a controversial choice among listeners at the time for our first book, Liz.
It was a controversial choice between the two of us as well, because we each went... It wasn't like a fight, but we each had an opinion on what book it should be first, and one of us won. I won't say which one of us
by
did.
A tiny margin, Liz.
Yes, but a tiny margin is still a margin, so
Okay, well, look, if modern politics have taught us anything, it's that the tiniest of margins can mean a great deal. Yes, it's true. We nominated two books, Men at Arms and Mort, to be the first one that we discussed, because we thought, I don't want to speak for you, Liz, but I think our feeling was we really wanted to start with a book that felt like a Discworld book, because we wanted people to get into what most of the episodes and most of the books that we'd be discussing would be like.
And I think this came out in the conversation we had, I don't know how many years ago it was now, but this one is kind of like a taster plate, I felt, for what the series is like. So you do meet a lot of the characters, but it's not overwhelming. You don't meet the witches, unfortunately, though that probably would have been a little bit too much plot. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it's just good to get a sample across all of Discworld if you're jumping in, cold.
Yeah, and it's also just a really good book. I think it's probably Pratchett's first, certainly in the Discworld books, his first great mystery. I mean, it's one of those mysteries where it's not that you don't know who did it. Many of the Watch books are kind of like that. We know who the villain is, but it's how are they going to figure this out and how they're going to stop them. But it's great. And it's also continuing that tradition of something from the real world coming into the Discworld and having that influence. And in this case, it's a gun.
Yeah. Or a gun. Because this being our first episode, we did have a lot of how do we pronounce it now that we're saying things out loud?
Yeah. You can go back and listen to Pratchett episode 1 anytime. We recommend it. It's like travelling back in time to 2017. But we thought it might be fun to include a few relevant excerpts in this episode. Like this one. as I was reading that, I'm like, this is the kind of book where you've never heard these names out loud. And I'm realizing my pronunciations could be quite contentious.
Well, I was thinking about that on the way here because I was thinking in my head, I say Angua.
Me too.
Yeah, Angua. Yeah, I think I normally say that, but then I'm more like, but surely it would be like Angua? I don't know. But Angua, I think, is better. Let's stick with that. We'll stick with that.
It's our Hermione moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's everybody, I think, has that issue when you've read a lot of fantasy books and then you come to discuss it. They're all made up. There is no correct way, right?
I mean...
Except probably there is.
Author's choice, I think. But we can't check that necessarily. But...
No. Yeah. I wonder if any of the readers of the audiobooks have ever made a choice about that, which Pratchett maybe didn't agree with. I think that seems unlikely to me, because he seems to be mates with everyone who worked on those. So, yeah, I'm sure they all knew what they were doing. Yeah. For those of you, we don't want to assume that everybody listens to the podcast because we know that's probably not true, as much as we might like it to be. So this was our first episode and we were still figuring out the format. I went back and looked. This is my original notebook. It didn't have the Pratchett sticker back then because we didn't have Pratchett stickers back then. We do now. But we weren't sure how it was going to work, really, in this first episode. But the basic structure of the episode is we do an intro like we did for this one. Or we read the blurb, we have a chat to our guest, which we normally have a guest. And then we talk about the book for up to 2 hours before we get into answering some questions. Yeah, sometimes more. I mean, some of our recordings have gone for 3 or even 3.5 hours. And then it's all about cutting it down to a reasonable level. And we weren't sure, if we were going to have little segments or little headings and stuff. So I got out my first page here. I had a few things. We had Pun Watch, which was unnecessary because you usually pick out all the best puns anyway. Yeah. And I've got also Font Watch, which is something I wish I'd kept up with because Pratchett he loves denoting particular characters by the way that they're written and either the font or the style of writing.
And there was a really interesting point specifically in this book about like how Edward de Eath, however we're saying it, he could think in italics. That was the thing. And so such people need to be watched, preferably from a safe distance. And you pointed out that whenever the gun has dialogue, it's also in italics. So that was, I thought, quite interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Like it's thinking. Which I think, and I don't know if that's intentionally meant to, but it kind of could be that to indicate that the gun's not so much speaking as it's like inserting thoughts into someone's brain.
But if you did do that section, you'd have to call it Font of Knowledge, so...
Okay. This is why... For those who don't listen to the podcast, there will be puns. That is...
You're welcome.
Yes. They are a great gift to the world. I sometimes have seemed perhaps ungrateful for this gift, but I promise I do enjoy them.
Is that what the noises of suffering mean, like ungratefulness?
Yeah, well, maybe a little. No, it's fine. Yeah, my notes. I used to write way too many. I write way too many notes. There's like 6 or 7 pages of notes here, and a lot of them are just like talk about this line. What does this mean? I think we did talk about most of them, but then I tried to do a summary of each character and this was so long ago now, Liz. This is November 2017. Feels like forever ago.
See, your system is so much more like sophisticated than mine, though, which is actually to just get an A4 piece of paper, fold it up into quarters, and then I have sections for each of the notes, quotes, footnotes, and other, and then I use that as the bookmark and go through as well. So it's been working so far, except for the fact that I threw some of them away, which has put me in hot water for this one, because I don't know what I thought, beyond the fact that we have an hour and a half recording of all of the things that we thought, so...
It's true.
That's all right. Yeah.
We can go back and revisit those at any time. I mean, not that I have. We have so many outtakes. This is something else. Like when we're editing them, the bits that we cut out, if they're long, like if it's a diversion, we're just going to cut this out because it's like 3 minutes and we can use that time to make the podcast a bit tighter and shorter. I keep those, and every now and then we'll put out some of those outtakes to our subscribers on our special subscriber-only bonus podcast, or occasionally throw them into other things. I put one... We recently had a short notice change to our reading schedule, and I put out a little extra bit in the podcast stream to say, hey, we're going to move the book we were going to read off for a month. We're going to do a short story, and as a reward for listening to this announcement, here's a little bit we cut out of a previous episode that's quite fun.
Yeah, a little bit of behind the scenes is that we do have more tangents than Bondi Beach.
Oh dear.
Yes.
When are you writing your comic fantasy novel, Liz? That's my question to you today. When's it happening?
I guess never, because the benchmark is too high. Like it's too intimidating to even try. There's good ones out there. I don't need to compete.
No, nonsense. I don't think that's true at all. I've read some really bad ones, so I'm sure yours would be way better than that. Like you don't have to be the best, Liz. You just got to be good.
Yes, I do. You got to be the best, otherwise don't try.
Oh no. Oh, this is a disaster. Well, look, we should let's think about Men-at-Arms though. Let's get back to the book now that you know who we are and what we do. I'm really happy we picked this as our first one.
Yeah.
Really happy. It is such a good introduction. And yes, it is a sequel. It's not the first Guards book, but you don't really need to know what happened in Guards to enjoy Men-at-Arms. Like, that's one of the geniuses of the Discworld series. There's 41 books, but pretty much all of them work if you read them on their own, which is great. That's not a problem. And yeah, it's just so much fun. And it's got some meat to it as well, because it's a bit longer than some of the earlier ones. And
I do love a whodunit, but it's like subverting the whodunit genre as well, because it kind of doesn't really matter. I don't want to go into spoilers, even though I'm pretty sure everyone here will have read it. But in the end, I feel like it doesn't matter who the revealed murderer was, because the real murderer is the Gon. Like, I feel like whoever it had been presented to probably would have been corrupted by it, unless it was Carrot.
Yes.
So that's why it didn't really matter who specifically it was, because it was just acting through someone else. Like, that was the real source of the villainy and the murder and the killing in this one.
I don't know if we discussed this in the episode. What do you think would have happened if Carrot had picked up the Gon?
I reckon he'd cracked it in half and put it neatly into the recycling. I was going to say threw it into the Ankh, but that's not Carrot energy, is it?
No, it would have just bounced off anyway. I remember there were several things that came up in this first episode that we sort of have revisited over the years. One of which was the amazingly great descriptions of the River Ankh in this book, including, there's a great one. Where is it? It's quite near this. It's in the middle here. The River Ankh is probably the only river in the universe on which the investigators can chalk the outline of the corpse, which I thought was great. Like, and then every time we've come to a book and there's a description of the River Ankh, we have felt like we've come home.
Yeah, and the thing that I realized that I had forgotten a little bit listening back to this episode was that I still get this sometimes. Whenever they mention the Ankh, I cannot stop myself from picturing myself drinking it, because they talk about the water so much. So I'm just sort of go, what would that taste like? And then it just like, I feel like queasy. But I can't stop myself going, wonder what just a big old mouthful of Ankh would be like.
You couldn't
Horrible.
drink it. It'd be more like a weird cake. You'd have to cut a slice out of it, I think. Isn't
like in old bars they used to have a spittoon, and that was so like it would be like drinking that, and you'd have to drink all of it because it would be stuff. This is one of the
it's getting gross.
Yeah, sorry.
There's a video game based on the online game Kingdom of Loathing, and it's called West of Loathing, so it's like a Western game. But you can go into all these saloons, and in every one there's a spittoon, and you can get into the spittoon to see what's in there, but you have to get past a whole bunch of dialogue options telling you that this is a terrible idea, what's wrong with you, why are you putting your hand in a spittoon?
Which I think is a fair question, I think.
Yeah. Very reasonable. Also, someone just mentioned the Yarra in the chat, and that's exactly where we go, I think, when we think of the Ankh. Obviously not modelled on the Yarra, and the poor old Yarra, of course, used to be a beautiful, pristine piece of water until, Europeans came and mucked it all up.
It was a big side of industry, wasn't it? They did a lot of like tanning and stuff.
Yeah. And the main city was always kind of next door to it. So certainly the bit that we're all familiar with from the CBD of what is now Melbourne is not that. It's not pristine and delightful. So yes, it's all gotten gross, but it's clearly based on, at least partly on, the Thames. Anyway, but that Men-at-Arms itself is introducing us to all of these concepts, including the Ankh, the Watch, all the Watch characters, but also a lot of the other side characters of Ankh-Morpork.
Like we even get a bit of Dibbler in there, not as much as I'd like, but probably more than we need.
Yeah. Well, because a lot of those characters that we think of ubiquitous, who are always in any book, that's set in Ankh-Morpork, a lot of them don't even appear until Guards, even though there are several books that have parts in Ankh-Morpork before that. But Guards kind of the first one that's really all set in the city. And then that's where we meet Dibbler for the first time, it's where we meet Detritus for the first time, or Detritus. I mean, again, you know,
I'm going to say Detritus because it's like, you know, the stuff over a forest floor. It makes sense to me that would be a good troll name.
Well, yeah, I agree, but that's how I pronounce that word. I say Detritus. But
True, and itis does mean inflammation, like anything that has itis at the end of it that's medical means like dermatitis is inflammation of the dermis, you know, so...
What would detritus be?
Inflammation of the detra.
Detra.
You know your detra. Means. Everyone's detra.
So, there's people are giving us feedback on our pronunciations now. This is a disaster. Why did we ever agree to do this live? No, it's a great idea.
I was going to go on about itis, but I feel like we're not here to talk about inflammation, so let's move on.
But we are anyway.
Detritus is an interesting one too, because is it detritus or detritus? I would say detritus.
I say detritus.
But there you go, see, because it's a real word and it has more than one pronunciation. Yeah. So we'll just all say it in our own way. Viewers, listeners, you're not viewers. If you are watching us, that's creepy. Stop it now. If you have opinions about the correct way to pronounce the names, please let us know. We'll talk about that on a future podcast.
But we should talk about the Watch, though, because this is the book where the Watch becomes the Watch that we're familiar with, not just because of the way that they're written and their characterizations, which are much more what we're used to than, say, Guards, where Vimes in particular is quite different in Guards, but also where we get a couple of members joining who are so important. This is when Detritus, I have to say it that way now, apparently, because it's Latin, but Detritus and Angua and also Cuddy join.
Don't talk to me about Cuddy because...
We have to talk about Cuddy.
I didn't
miss him
think
so much.
Because I didn't think he'd be introduced and die in the same book. And I remember the first time rereading this, I had conflated him and Cheery as being the same character because it had been so long since I'd read it when we first went back to this. And I was like, oh yeah. And then when he died, I was just like, excuse me?
Yeah.
And I was waiting for it to be undone, for it to be a mistake. And then it was just very upsetting. So...
Yeah. I love Cuddy. It's weird that for a very traditional dwarf, he really makes... I think I said this back in Pratchett number 1, but that he makes such an impression in such a reasonably short period of time. But also, it's just the friendship that he has with Detritus, or Detritus, I'm never going to get it right, is so delightful and wonderful. I always hoped that he would get mentioned in later books, at least in passing. And I think there's like one sort of oblique sideways mention where Detritus is wearing the helmet, the cooling helmet. And I think he vaguely says something like, this was made by a friend of mine. And I was like, oh, but I think maybe also I'm imagining that it went that far. I don't think it was ever, so there's some downsides to making every book really approachable to a new reader because you don't get those sort of nice revisits. You don't get those sort of like direct callbacks to characters who aren't there.
But there are some nice callbacks within the book itself, I guess, because it is quite like a lengthy story, and there's also like the mention of Sword in the Stone, and then like it just kind of comes around. But I do like coming back to it is like meeting friends again. But I agree with you in that it's I agree with you in that it's So there's that.
The kind of scintillating commentary that would normally get cut out. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. There's some oddities in the book, but we were talking about the Watch though. They really make themselves felt as a presence. Like we know who they are now from this book. But I think there's still things that in retrospect, like we talked about this at the time, but I think looking back on it now, I don't know if we feel differently 3.5 years down the line. Do we feel differently about, for example, the romance between Angua and Carrot, which at the time we did not find very convincing?
When I was reading it, I was like, well, I like both of them and they're both smart and attractive and we like them. So of course we kind of want them to get together, but they also just feels like they're fated to get together and there's no real chemistry.
Yeah, they wouldn't have
between
done
them.
it by themselves.
No.
Yeah, I think in later books he kind of nails that better, but in this one
Yeah.
it's like you just have to be together. There's no, and the way she talks about him is just sort of observing the way other people relate to him.
Yeah, and also she's kind of, I feel like it's that, like when there was a new reboot of Scooby-Doo and they made Velma fall in love with Shaggy, I was like, no, the smart woman doesn't go for the dumb guy. Like, and I'm not saying that Carrot is dumb. He just has a very linear way of viewing things, but it's like, but why would she find him attractive? He doesn't get any of her jokes. He doesn't get anyone's jokes. He's just a nice dude. Why should she fall for him?
Also, she seems really bored on all their dates.
Yeah.
Like, she goes on them because she likes walking and stuff, because she likes going for walkies. But his dates are really boring and she doesn't seem to actually really enjoy them as a side point.
And then Gaspard says he's your master, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not into that
into
either. Yeah.
no.
I haven't changed my mind on that. Like, as in, having read more books, I think they develop more of a rapport, but that's, like, the start of their relationship still feels very forced to me. Like, I don't see what she would see in him as a romantic partner necessarily. Like, I can see, like, everyone loves Carrot. He's got something that draws you to him, and he seems like a genuinely nice person. But Angua, the way she's characterized, it doesn't seem to me that she'd be drawn to someone like that in that way. But they are also, I feel, quite, like, she's characterized quite inconsistently throughout. Like, her motives sort of change a bit. There's, like, a section where she's quite dismissive when she thinks that Vimes has been visiting sex workers. She makes a comment about, oh, if she was only $2, like, that wouldn't be very good, which doesn't seem to fit with other things she said previously. So I do think that her characterization is a bit shaky in that book, and that follows through into how she and Carrot come together at the beginning. But that doesn't mean that later on they don't seem like a good fit.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's a kind of a turning point in the series of Pratchett sort of writing deeper and more interesting women. Where, I mean, when we've read a lot of the earlier books, we've noted that they have a few interesting points, but they're often a bit one note, or they're very much there to support the male characters. But then they become deeper and more interesting, and it's not until you get, I think his best female characters are the witches, and he has introduced them by this stage, and Tiffany as well. Now that we've started reading those books, she's so great. I love her so much. But, there's some stuff going on with Angua where he's really trying to figure her out and decide how he wants to write her and what she should be like.
I hate saying this because I don't feel like everyone has to be partnered off in every book ever, but I found myself when I revisited this one shipping her and Gaspard a little bit.
Oh, no.
Because, like, because they kind of had their buddy cop thing in this, but they also had quite good banter. And, like, something I thought last time around, which I think I've come even more around to, is it seems like Gaspard is one half of her and Carrot is suiting sort of another half of her, but it does seem like, I don't know, her relationship and conversation with Gaspard is more natural, and I would have liked to see, like, that friendship in other books more.
Well, I guess he knows the truth about her. She's not hiding anything from him, which makes it a bit easier for her to be herself. Whereas even with Carrot, when they're getting along really well, she is for most of this book keeping it a secret that she's a werewolf. So there's that wall between them there, which makes things difficult. Yeah.
But, like, what do Carrot and Angua talk about? Like, now they're in, like, after this book, when they're in a relationship and when they're having quiet moments? Because I'm just, like, how do they pass time? Because it seems he's very earnest and she sometimes makes jokes, and they don't seem to, like, what is there that...
It's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, Carrot is so... the way that he's written is basically you get the impression that whoever he's talking to them about whatever it seems they're interested in. Like, he just takes an interest in what they're interested in. And so it's hard to know. But then, but every time he takes her on a date, he's taking her to, like, the Dwarf Bread Museum, which is great.
Or, like, here's an interesting cobblestone, which I would be interested in, but...
Yeah, me too. I would love to go to the actual Dwarf Bread Museum. But it's weird. And speaking of Angua and Gaspard, though, and also Detritus and Cuddy, they do have those buddy cop vibes. I recently read this great role-playing game for 2 players called Partners, and it's all about that sort of procedural police drama, buddy cop kind of vibe. And it characterizes when you have 2 people investigating stuff together, that one of them is always the straight shooter and the other one is always the wild card. And I'm just wondering, in those pairings, who's who? I mean, I think with Angua and Gaspode, it's pretty clear that Angua is the straight shooter. Gaspode is the wild card.
Detritus is the wild card, I reckon.
You reckon?
Yeah. But maybe I'm projecting some Peacemaker stuff from later onto him, but...
Well, no, I think this works, right? Because he's either so stupid that he says things that he doesn't understand but which inspire Cuddy, or he's got the helmet on and he's so smart, he's like the Sherlock Holmes half of the team, like working stuff out that's no one else could understand in a million years. So it's, yeah, I think you're right. I think he is the wild card. We've got to talk about the other Watch members, though. We'll get to Vimes. I think we can leave Vimes to last. But what about Fred and Nobby? I almost said Fred and Colin, and I'm like, no, that's the same person. Fred and Nobby, who, I mean, in this book, this is archetypal them. There's a few bits in later books when we get to those in the podcast where, like, when Fred goes mad with power while Vimes is away in the Fifth Elephant, I still feel like it's very funny, but I just don't. It doesn't seem in character to me. But I was willing to, run with it for the comedy,
for the humor.
Yeah. But in this book, like, they don't do anything weird or wacky. Like, it's not like Feet of Clay where Fred gets caught up in the, being chased by the Terminator effectively kind of sequence. And it's not like Jingo where they get in disguise and do all that sort of nonsense in Clatch. This is them in their element. This is them being flat-footed coppers, which I kind of love.
They'd adapt no matter what is going on. Like, because they're just there for the long haul. I reckon they'd happily have just done the three of them basically be in the Watch forever, but when it changes, they're also happy with that. And what I really like about them both as a team is that they're both very much on the same page about sort of doing the bare minimum, but having a little bit of integrity.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. No, I think so. I reckon I've got this partners thing in my head again now, so I think Fred is the straight shooter and Nobby's the wild card.
Yeah, well, Nobby has to be the wild card. Like, he's a guy who's willing to cut corpses' fingers off to get their rings on a battlefield.
It's true.
So I feel like that's not the straight shooter.
Yeah, no, totally not. And also, he's like remarkably stupid at times. I mean, so is Fred, to be fair. He says a lot of things that he clearly doesn't understand. But he also says things that sort of spark a little sort of idea. I mean, I don't think, but really they're never going to solve any crimes on their own. So I don't know that they quite fit those archetypes anyway, but that's all right. But we should. Sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say they're not quite like a buddy cop team. They're just there's something else. Like, they're a team, but it's not. If you watch their buddy cop movie, not much would happen.
They're like Hitchcock and Scully in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. They're there to be partners who are just they show the downsides.
They're great at paperwork.
Yeah. Yeah, except they're not. Or are they? I can never quite tell. I'm never sure. I recently got a hold of the Ankh-Morpork Archives Volume 2, which is if you haven't heard about these, everyone, these are large coffee table sized books that reprint a lot of the material from the Discworld diaries, which have been long out of print because they only ever produced them in the year they were diaries for. And the new volume, Volume 2, or the newer volume, has the stuff from the Watch diary in it. And it's got some great stuff, including, speaking of paperwork, some example reports of an arrest. And there's one from Carrot, which is written in Carrot style with a lot of detail, but then it just has all this list of mistakes made. And you're not sure if he's written this to show mistakes or if he's just been too enthusiastic and made a bunch of mistakes. But then there's one from Nobby where his cousin, I think it is stealing from him in the middle of the night. And so he arrests him and he tries to resist and he kicked him in a fork and captured him. And that's this is a perfect report. It's very clear. Person correctly identified, all this stuff. So maybe they are great at paperwork. They've been doing it long enough that they know what they're doing.
And they probably don't do that much other stuff.
Yes. We should talk about Vimes, though, as well. Yeah.
Because he's not really he's not as central in this book as he is in other Watch books, perhaps.
Yeah.
Because a thing we noticed, or I think that Cal Wilson pointed out, was that he kind of just disappears for the middle of this book.
Yeah.
He's just gone. That was not an intentional pun. But yeah, there's just a big sort of Vimes-shaped gap in the middle, and he's just getting drunk and is presumably getting ready for his wedding a little bit. But it's unusual for him to just not be around for a watch book.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, his presence, I think, is felt the whole time, but he is very much... I don't know if Pratchett was trying to figure out how to write this character who previously was at the forefront of everything and now has been sort of promoted to above street copper.
Oh, but has he been promoted properly there? Oh, no, yeah, because he got promoted there and then he gets promoted again at the end of the book because he just can't stay away from being promoted.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, in the Ankh-Morpork Diaries thing from the Watch, there's a bit where he's writing a letter to the rest of the Watch because it's written... I think it was written like just after Jingo, so it's in the midpoint of the Watch series. But he says like, I keep getting promoted, but I like to think that these promotions are a recognition of the services of the Watch as a whole. I mean, like, of course you would say that. But yeah, it's a bit weird because he still like sets everything in motion. Like he tells everyone else, Vetinari tells him not to investigate what's going on with the Assassin's Guild and this theft. And he's like, to hell with that, I'm going to do it. And he tells the others to do it. And then Carrot writes a letter for Fred, which he reads. And yeah, he's behind the scenes a lot.
Mm.
It's almost like they're playing a role-playing game and whoever's playing Vimes' character just can't make it to a few sessions in the middle. So they're like, okay, well, you're off doing, you're getting ready to get married.
Yeah, it's presumably to retire as well, because that was the whole thing, that the dread hanging over this as a reader is like, oh, are we going to lose this character from the Watch as well? Because he's supposed to be getting his gold watch and disappearing off into married bliss. Yeah. So if you don't know what's going to happen, but you've read the previous one, like there is a fear that you're going to lose him as a character.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the other tragedies of this book, and quite a few of the other Watch books that follow. Sybil, who's such a force of nature in Guards, is really not very present in this book and a lot of the other ones either. Like, she doesn't have a lot to do. She kind of worries about him when he's not there.
Mm.
She's also busy organizing her own wedding. Although then there's that trope of the man getting married is not doing any organizing. Like, he doesn't really care about this wedding, apparently. But yeah, it's a bit of a shame.
Yeah, I think it's interesting though, because she still feels like correctly rendered even in the few glimpses we get of her, because she's still got that upper class propriety. This is what we do. This is my responsibility kind of thing, which is why she like wants to take a bit of his name, wants to sign over her stuff. Like it makes sense of she hasn't been able to let go of like the traditions of her class, but also she is someone who raises swamp dragon that regularly explode and things. So it still feels within her character that she would be doing all that stuff and being like, no, don't get involved, Sam. Like, you stay up. Like, I don't want your opinion on flowers or tableware. Yeah. As much as I would love to see him dragged, like I would happily have read a novella or probably a full book of him being forced to plan a wedding, because that would be amazing, delightful. Yeah,
that could have. Imagine him. Oh, now I'm imagining young Sam getting married and Vimes getting involved in that to be disastrous father of the bride nonsense. Yeah, I mean, I'm very glad, like when we came to The Fifth Elephant, which I didn't remember very well when we reread it, I was so glad to see Sybil's role substantially increased and that she has a lot to do in that book. By comparison with the other Watch books, she's still very much a supporting character. But yeah, she's great in that. And she kind of fades away into the background again. I mean, the next one we're reading is Night Watch, and she's barely in it at all because most of the action takes place at a time when they haven't met. So I go back and forth, but I do enjoy her as a character very much. Yeah. We should talk about the villain as well. Edward Death. No.
Yeah.
Wait, is he interesting? I mean, we've read so many of the villains now. How does he stack up against people like Mr. Teotimi or all the others?
I think he's okay, but I mean, he has his villainy. Sorry, here's the resident.
It's Asimov
coming to.
Hello.
Whoops! I'm sorry, buddy. He fell over. But you should probably go on the floor now. Oh no, you're going on the couch. Sorry. There's his tails. He's just got a.
Yeah, my cat is he's gone somewhere to be chill, which is not his usual modus operandi when there's a Zoom meeting going on. But usually one thing he sometimes does is he'll stand just sort of there, and this eldritch tentacle of black will just sort of flick around in the It's very disconcerting. Anyway, yeah. What were we saying? We were talking about
is he interesting? And
yeah,
I think,
Edward Death.
I think he is interesting because he just wants to bring kings back, and he's got like quite a clear motivation, but he does have to split his villainy with the Gon. So it's like, is he the bad guy, or is he just a conduit through which this is brought back into society when they thought they'd gotten rid of it?
Yeah.
And I have to confess, I forget like a lot about him as a character. Like, I can't, like, without going back to the book, he's just a blank space to me, whereas a lot of the villains in subsequent books, I think, stand out more as individuals. But there is the line that we've talked about thinking in italics. But yeah, I don't know.
I mean, look, there's some great stuff in there. When we read Guards, we saw in the sort of the brothers of the Ebon Knight or whatever they're called, the cult, they were very much like this sort of, people who are swayed by far-right demagogues who convince them that everybody else is at fault for the bad things about their life. You're the victims here. We saw that allegory there. I think that creeps in here. Like, looking at this again now, there's stuff in there about people really wanting to go back to the past. I think the line is like going back to the past as a more defensible position, like wanting things to go back in time because it feels more like you can just be, on top and no one questions it anymore. And we liked that. And I think that seems very relevant, more than it did when we read it then, in many ways, with the way that people backlash against the progression of our society, in ethical and political terms, that some people just, and it is challenging. Like, we do have to rethink a lot of our worldviews to make things better and fairer. But the solution is not to stick our heads in the sand and wish it was 50, 70 years ago. But that's what he's doing.
And it's also interesting because a big point that came up last time we discussed this, and that I think is still relevant, is Veterinary, I would argue, is a very good ruler. He does a good job, and he's working in the interest of the people rather than in the interest of power. And Carrot would probably also be a very good king. Like, if it came to it, he would probably do a good job. But if you just have two good individuals who are good in the job at the time, it's the succession plan that's a problem. And in a monarchy, it's more difficult because, like, it's just whoever's related the most to the person who's most recently died. And so you have even less control over who's going to come into the job. Yeah. But what is the succession plan for Veterinary? Like, he's surely someone who has thought about it, but it's tricky because the plan to bring in a king just as a plan is bad. To bring in Carrot as a king, I guess, is probably quite good. Hello again, buddy.
Yeah, but not intentionally.
But not instead of Veterinary, because Veterinary is doing fine. And his motivation isn't like, oh, we need better leadership. It's to go back to tradition, like traditional values, rather than wanting improvement for society. But maybe that's what he thinks is what society needs, so it's complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too that this is, like a lot of the watch books, particularly, well, there's three in particular. There's this one, there's Guards, and there's, well, it's not a watch book, but The Truth is also like this. And I think there's one more, but they're all about deposing Veterinary and replacing him with someone that, the guild leaders and the lords of the city can either use as a puppet or who they think will be sympathetic to what they want. And it's a repeated theme that people don't like the way Veterinary runs the place, but he's still a dictator. As much as we love him, and he's very efficient and he gets things done and he seems to be quite fair, he's also ruthless. He'll put people to death.
Just like a king would, though.
Yes, that's true. And in our later discussions, I can't remember what we said in this first episode, but we had you have floated the idea several times that you think maybe Veterinary is grooming Moist von Lipwig to take over.
Yeah, that's something I came up with subsequently, and there's also I can't stop looking at the chat, and there's a good theory coming up in that, which we also talked about in the first episode, which is like zombie Veterinary just ruling forever.
Maybe it's not going to be a human successor. Like, maybe it's a dwarf or a troll or a
golem. Live forever.
Oh, yeah.
Can he get turned into a vampire and then he can just do it forever?
Oh, that's a good...
Yeah.
Because I think I would love that. But...
Yeah. Well, I think this has been great to revisit the themes of this book and think about it again in the sort of light of the 2 and a bit years more podcasting and rereading that we've done in between. 3 and a bit years. I don't know how long we've been doing this. A long time.
Let's just not keep track. It's been a while.
We'll be going forever at this stage, I think, which is fine because we're not just dropping in the short stories now. We are also intending to start covering the various adaptations because we've had many people ask us if we will. And it's just not going to be possible to do those as bonus episodes probably. So they'll start dropping in the main feed, I think, soon or next year at least. So it's a long drive, but let's get to some questions. We've had some great questions in the chat, and Danny, thank you so much, has been doing a great job collecting those and collating them for us. Why don't we get into some, Liz?
All right, we'll try and get through all of them, and I'm going to just do it in order. But if we don't get to your question, I'm profusely sorry. So we'll do our best.
Yeah,
all right.
Cool.
So we'll start with Danny's example question, which is, which character gets most shortchanged in Men-at-Arms, and why is it Gaspode? First of all, yes. Completely agree with that.
I don't think he gets shortchanged.
People are always kicking him.
Oh, well,
he
that's
uses
true.
his human voice to be able to tell people, stop kicking that dog, and maybe also doing the thing. So people literally treat him like garbage. I mean, I don't know if you kick garbage, but yeah.
Look, is the suggestion of this question, you think there should be more books where Gaspode is a major, main character? Because there's really only, I would say there's only kind of 2. He's a major character in Moving Pictures, and he's a major character probably in The Fifth Elephant, or at least more major there. And he shows up in a lot of the other Watch books. And in The Truth, I love him in The Truth. He's so good. I think that's probably my favourite Gaspode appearance. But, You think yes? I think it's all right. I think it's fine for him to be a great supporting character, you know?
Yeah, I think he does well here. He also serves to characterize Angua quite well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I know that they get him a nice home and everything, and he doesn't like that either. So it's not for lack of trying to make things better for him. But yes, I just want things to work out well for him. I just wish him all the best.
That's very reasonable. What's next?
We've got a comment from Carl, which is very valid, which is that it doesn't rhyme. It needs to be notes, quotes, footnotes, and goats. So I will work on finding something for my 4th panel that will rhyme.
Jotes. It's like jokes, but you misspell it as a joke. No,
totes.
That doesn't work. Totes.
Just my favorite quotes written on illustrations of tote bags.
Yes.
So the next one's from Amy. So this one's one from me. What's your favorite Discworld pun or play on words? This is impossible to answer off the top of my head, actually, because I saw this one come up in the chat. I was panicking, being which one is it? And I can't remember off the top. I do love in soul music all the names of the bands, so that you try and work out what real world band he's referencing, because there's a lot of clever ones in that, and I feel every time I reread that book there's one I'm I didn't get that last time. So perhaps my favorite series, continuous series of related puns is that. But
okay,
yeah.
I think, look, I said this in a recent episode because I think it is possibly one of my favorite ones, but in The Light Fantastic there's a line about I can't remember if it's about wizards or books now, but he talks about you can't keep too many of them together because you might get a critical black mass, and I just thought that was very, very good. I think that one just tickled me because it was a science and occult pun combined into one, so I quite enjoyed that. I think that's my favorite, but there's so many. You can't pick a favorite. Come on.
Yeah, it's like picking. Yeah. So the next one's from Stuart, which is for Ben. So Ben, if you were doing a radio adaptation of the Discworld, would you start with Men-at-Arms or another book?
Oh, no, I don't think I would. I think I'm imagining this if you're doing a series, because there have been adaptations for radio of a lot of the books as sort of standalone things. But I can imagine if you're doing it as a series and you were trying to do, I think the Watch is such, and this was the idea, of the original idea for the Watch, and it sort of obviously evolved differently to that for the TV series, but the original idea was, let's make the basis of the show this sort of procedural crime drama about the Watch, and then we can bring in other characters around that and expand the stories outward. And I think that's what I would do. So I'd probably start more with Guards, but I think I would adapt it to feel more like the later Watch books, so that there was this consistent feel throughout, and then sort of bring in some other characters as we went. Yeah, I think that's what I'd do.
All right, the next question is from Steve. So in Men-at-Arms, we get to see inside the Fool's Guild, would Elizabeth feel at home in this place of official puns and jokes?
I don't know what guild I'd like to be in though.
Not
Fool's
Fool's
Guild for me.
Guild.
Not Fool's, yeah, well, not
Hi,
Fool's
Fool's
Guild.
Guild, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. We've got two comedians here. Neither of us want to be in the Fool's Guild.
So I'd like to start by saying how much I enjoy the description of the Fool's Guild, because it is the grimmest place of mechanical jokes and just like the whitewash not quite falling down, and it's just there's just a deeply unhappy feeling to it, and it's right next to the Assassin's Guild, which is so like inappropriate and appropriate in the same way.
Yeah.
I guess it depends, like, because I feel like the Fool's Guild would have approved jokes, and you can only work from a specific handbook of things and within a certain parameter, and also probably certain people own certain types of jokes, and you can't make, like, it would be like the faces as well. You can't, like, someone will own, like, this kind of thing or this kind of pun. Yeah. So I feel like I could carve out a niche over a very long time, but I also think it would kill the joy of comedy for me as well, being the Fool's Guild, because it's not a funny place.
I mean, look, speaking as someone who now teaches as part of a comedy degree, I feel like the Fool's Guild would have to evolve. I think there's still a place for traditional, like even in the real world, there's definitely still a place for traditional clowning. And there's also, you know, the traditional sort of King's Fool, like Verence from Weird Sisters, who we get a lot of description of his backstory being in the Fool's Guild, learning that rather than being a clown. And they do have very prescribed ways in which to act. Like, it's very, I think I said this in the Men-at-Arms episode when we were talking about it. It's very commedia dell'arte. It's like, here's your specific character, put on this mask, and now you have these characteristics, away you go. But I think they would have to evolve. You know, I think there's probably a burgeoning stand-up comedy scene in Ankh-Morpork now. Mostly
like a soul music kind of book, but about comedy.
Yeah, that would be great. And I think that would be coming up, and most of those people will be just doing it off their own backs. But then the Fool's Guild will be like, we got to get in on this and create a course for doing it. So yeah, I think that would be the way to go.
All right. This one's from Heath. So this one's about the relationship between Angua and Carrot. So I always felt like the forced nature was kind of the point being made, kind of like they should be together, so they do get together. And I think that is a very good point, because there is the kind of air of destiny about it, especially with the whole sort of implication about Carrot's background. So I think that's very fair.
Yeah, no, I go along with that. That's a great comment. Thank you.
All right, so the next one is from Joanne. What was the first Terry Pratchett book you read? Not necessarily for the podcast.
Ooh, well, I mean, I think for those who haven't listened to the podcast, you might have heard this story before, but so you can go back and listen to it in several, I think 2 or 3 different episodes. The short version for me is that I was a massive Douglas Adams fan, still am, and when I was way too young to get most of the jokes, and I ran out of Douglas Adams books. This was years before he died, but and my mum went into a bookshop and said, "Son loves Douglas Adams, what else should he read?" And they said, "This guy," and she bought me The Colour of Magic. And so I read, the first things I read were the Discworld books in order, up to where they were being published at the time, which I think was Interesting Times. And then I started reading all this other stuff as well.
So I actually was wrong about the first Terry Pratchett book I read. Because I thought that the first one I read was The Fifth Elephant, because I have this thing where and I still do it sometimes, but especially as a teenager, I would go into the library and just choose something at random, often off the returns rack. So, like, I'd look at the strange collection of books put all together, and I'm like, oh, people chose to read these ones. I wonder what here looks interesting. And I picked up The Fifth Elephant that way. And it is, I would argue, one of the worst Discworld books to start with, because it's like later on, it's really confusing. You're not invested in anyone. Obviously, it was fine, because I was like, I want to read more of these. And so I went back to the library and I would just get whichever ones were available at the time, because while they had a full set, they were often checked out. So it was just a matter of what happened to be on the shelf when I was there. So I had a very ad hoc approach to reading Discworld. But for the longest time, I thought that The Fifth Elephant was the first one I read. But then when we did the Bromeliad, I realized that I'd actually read them in year 7, because my teacher, who was really, she was an excellent teacher, the sort that I hope that every child has at some point. She would bring in books from home and had a bookshelf in the classroom in addition to the school library, but ones that she thought would be quite good for our class specifically, and she recommended them to me. And I remember I read them, and so I hadn't connected those as Terry Pratchett books until we went back to it, and I just think that I hadn't connected that as something, because I read a lot in middle school and junior school. So the short version is the Bromeliad, but for the longest time I thought it was the Fifth Elephant.
Oh wow! I just saw in the chat Tanya's saying that she's a teacher, and recently they read "Only You Can Save Mankind" in class. That's fascinating to me. I would love to know how that went, because it is such a book of its time in terms of the video games representation and a lot of the themes, because it's all about the Gulf War. I would love to know what kids reading it now think about it. That's cool.
And I absolutely wish that I had found the Johnny books when I was the younger, because I think especially the one about the graveyard, it feels like it was written specifically for me. It's just all of my interests crammed into a book, and I'm just like, how did I not find this earlier? So, yeah.
Well, like I said at the time when we were reading them, while I didn't come to them until a few years later, I was Johnny's age at the time those books are set, or slightly pretty close. I think there was a year or so older or younger, but so they felt very, very familiar to me. It was great.
So next question is from Tanya. So guns don't kill people, people kill people, therefore death is the villain. Discuss. So that's it's a tricky one in this book, because because the gun is speaking to him in his head. But I think there is some ambiguity there where it's not clear if the gun really... because you could read the book in the most obvious way, which is the gun has this supernatural power to influence people. But you can also read it as an allegory that people are just overtaken by the power of being so easily able to kill someone else at a distance, or, without any particular physical effort. And I think you could absolutely read that as an allegory, and that, some people, because the way Vimes thinks about it when he picks it up is quite, he feels that power and he's like, no, I don't want to have anything, he's fighting it. Yeah, so that's a good point. Because it's the fact that there's only one in there as well. It allows something that probably exists within most people to come out in a way that might not otherwise be as readily apparent. So, yeah, I agree with that as well. Well, it's not very exciting if we just agree. I feel like I should just have a contrarian opinion to bring things along, but I think that is a very strong point, and I'm completely on board with that.
Yeah.
So many great questions. And we're moving on to our final question, which is from Amy.
I think we might have one more after this, but let's go with this one first.
All right. So, would Veterinary come back as a zombie if he could? Could a zombie run Ankh-Morpork? So we touched on this, but would he? Is a great question.
Yeah.
I would love it if he did, because I think great, he's got all the right things, but would your motivations change over an eternal life? Would you just get fed up?
Yeah. Well, it's a tough question, right? Because I think he could do the job indefinitely, but I don't think he'd want to. I think he'd feel like at a certain point it's time for him to step down. I feel like that's part of his calculus, in that the way he's evolving the city and pushing it forward is trying to get to a point where the systems that make it work and make it fairer can continue regardless of who is at the top, and that the person at the top has to deal with, extreme situations and emergencies and difficulties, but that the city itself now will kind of keep going. I feel that's my hope for Veterinary. I don't think he ever says anything like that, but I feel like part of his goal is to make himself obsolete.
Yeah, but I do think that potentially, as you said earlier, he might be a little bit grooming Moist One Lipig for the role, or as he probably has a few options that he's working on, or contingency plans. But yeah, because you need to also he would probably want to make himself obsolete in the city to run on its own, but you also need to have a way to nip in the bud anyone who wants to inevitably bring back kings or to take over for themselves and things. And so even if you have a great functional city running on its own without leadership, you'll still have that human nature that's going to make people try and take over, even if it's to the detriment of society in general, because that's human nature. So I don't know how you could make yourself obsolete and prevent that from happening 50, 60, 10 years down the line after you're done.
Yeah, difficult.
All right, we're running Time and time. So was there that last question?
There is that one more. Linda's managed to slip one in at the end here. We'll try and collect it. She says, death collects the souls of people and separates the soul from the body, as we know in Reaper Man and Mort. But death does not actually cause the end of life. So does death actually cause death? This is a good, like, metaphysical one. We might have to think about this, Liz. This could be one we hang on to. It's a great
It's one I'd like to
question.
think about more. But it also depends on, like, how death is defined in the Discworld. Because, like, even, like, in Round World, death is, like, we've talked about this before, death is not consistently defined. Like, what is death? But that's a great one that I'm going to have to mull for a while.
But I think that's kind of all the time we've got. Thank you, everyone, for your great questions. If you want to listen to Prat Chat, you can find it at pratchatpodcast.com and on all the places where good podcasts are given away for free because they don't cost anything. You can also, if you like, choose to support the podcast. And if you become a subscriber, you get access to our subscriber-only bonus podcast, The Ook Club. And depending on the level you support us at, you might even get some extra goodies in the mail.
Yeah, and thank you for listening to us.
You've been listening to Prat Chat, the monthly Terry Pratchett Book Club podcast with Prat Chatters Elizabeth Flux and Ben McKenzie. That's me, recorded live at Nullus Anxietas, the Lost Con. Prat Chat is produced and edited by me, with music by David Ashton of Sample and Hold Studios. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook at Prat Chat Podcast, and listen to past episodes and support the production of new ones via pratchatpodcast.com. Join the conversation for this episode using the hashtag PratChatNALC.
Prat Chat is brought to you by Splendid Chaps Productions. We make entertainment for your ears, like the Doctor Who podcast Splendid Chaps and time travel comedy series Night Terrors. To find out more, visit splendidchaps.com.